Hello and welcome to JLS Comics. Once again, you are watching the channel. Thanks for pressing play. Today we're going to do another video review, movie review that is, and it's going to be for Ghost in the Shell, which came out this March 2017. Had the pleasure of seeing it yesterday, actually, and we're going to go over my impression of it. At the end, I'll give it a rating, as I normally do with these movie reviews, and I look forward to hearing your feedback and your comments as well. So we'll definitely get into that. So this movie, it came out this year, 2017. Runtime was about 107 minutes. It was rated PG-13, and I believe the budget was estimated at right around $110 million. So I'm sure it will do better than cross that line into the black, into the profit. So it's directed by Rupert Sanders. And the writer was Masamune Shiro. You should know him as being the writer of the original manga. We'll get to that in a second. Major, also known as Matoko Kusanagi, that was played by Scarlett Johansson. We had Batu, played by Paolo Aspak, and Beat, very important character. That was Takeshi Kitano, and Dr. Ole was Juliette Binoche. Kuze was played by Michael Pitt. You had Han, played by Chin Han, and I think it was Ladrina. She was played by Danusia Samal. Then another character was Cutter, that was played by Peter Ferdinando. And actually, it was Scarlett Johansson obviously is Major. Margot Robbie was originally approached for the role. Ended up going to her. Another interesting name that was attached to this film was Avi Arad, who is very famous for his work with Marvel Studios, another series that I like. So let's talk about what I thought of the movie. But before we do that, I want to ask you an interesting question and kind of keep this in mind when we go through this. Interesting philosophical, existential question for you. And I'll tell you where this comes from, but I'm going to use an example that I think we, in the nerd and geek community, might maybe associate it with better. So there was a book. It was written by Karen Travis. I believe it was in 2006. It was part of the Bloodlines Legacy of the Force stories. And this was about Boba Fett. Okay, and in that story, Boba Fett actually had his ship, Slave One, that was given to him by his father. However, it had been so damaged and so beat up that at that point during the story, the only thing original from the ship was still the captain's chair. So my question to you, and keep this in mind, is that still the same ship? Is that still the original ship, or has it now become a new ship because it has all new parts? Okay, so that actually comes from a paradox. It was a story that was originally posited by Plutarch. If you don't know who he is, I'm sure you do. You're very intelligent folks here I'm talking to. Greek philosopher. He had a paradox, something that he would posit to people. It was actually originally done by Plato, but it's most famously associated with Plutarch, called the ship of Theseus. And it was that same question: a wooden ship, over time, every board, every plank was replaced. Is it now a different ship, or is it the same ship? Okay, so keep that in mind when we go through this. So let's talk about some of the positives with the movie. Visually, this movie was beautiful. It was stunning. You could tell a lot of that $110 million budget went to the CGI and to the graphics. It was just, there were so many scenes in there that, whether they're walking through downtown, whether they're, out on a boat looking at the cityscape, whether they're actually, into the computer, it's just stunning visually. And that was one of the things that was probably for me, like the most satisfying about this movie. I'm a very visual person. So for me, seeing that really engaged a lot of other senses as well. And I came out of there having that been one of the highlights for me. And then with the soundtrack added in, it was very, very ethereal. It was very, I don't know what the right word is, but it just left me, feeling very satisfied in this regard. It did borrow a lot from the Ghost in the Shell mythos, namely the masterpiece movie, the anime from 1995, but then a lot from the TV show as well. and that was done in I think it was the early 2000. It was called Standalone Complex. So I recommend watching those before before you see at some point, whether it's before or after, but definitely see those because it really adds to this mythos and your understanding of the movie. Now, I'm going to tell you, for me, having been familiar and aware of the anime, of the manga that came before, and then the TV show, the video games as well, I know that these movies really touch onto some really deeper questions, deeper existential questions. What does it mean to be human? At what point are you no longer you? Do your dreams and your memories define you? And this was touched on in the movie. If your memories and your dreams can be replaced or reprogrammed, does that no longer define you because you're still you in the present, just with different dreams and memories? And then where is that line? Where is the boundary between the human and the machine? If that interface is there so much, where is that line drawn? Interesting question, right? The book, Masamune Shiro, actually kind of drew inspiration from a few different places. One of which, and I'll bring you all the way back to the 17th century, Renes Descartes is a French philosopher, and he basically said that the mind and the body can act independent of each other. They're kind of one, but they're same, and that's sort of paradoxical in and of itself. But then, in the 1960s, you had Arthur Koestler, who took some inspiration from another philosopher named Gilbert Ryle. They were describing Cartesian dualism, which was from René Descartes, and basically said, no, they're not independent. The mind and the soul are not independent. And there's a whole lot that he was talking about, and I mentioned that they're at the same time, they're whole, but they're parts. There's all these feedbacks and these negative feedback loops going through each other that need each other to exist, that need each other to survive. So Shiro sort of was also denying that dualistic, philosophy from René Descartes, in this. But he kind of took it to a larger scale with this because everybody's connected to their mind, so it's more of a, global systemic network versus a network within your one body. So the same concept is blown up massively. He also drew a lot of inspiration from a story. Well, let me tell you that the Koestler book, the novel from 1967, was called Ghost in the Machine, okay? But he also took inspiration from Victor Hugo, who wrote a story called The Man Who Laughs. And incidentally, that was actually, it's rumored, posited that DC's The Joker was taken from that as well. And then later on, there was The Laughing Man by J.D. Salinger. Basically, was telling the story of the man who laughs to some kids that he was with. And that kind of comes from there. There is in Standalone Complex, The Laughing Man, and then Ghost in the Shell, that the villain there was the Puppet Master. So it takes a little bit from those. So I wanted to mention that. I thought it was interesting. So yeah, like I said, this movie was, it was absolutely stunning, and you can see some of the visuals on the screen. At one point, though, it's kind of a double-edged sword because it was so impactful visually. At sometimes it almost took away from what was going on. You're so busy looking at the background, like in this picture where she's walking through the city, that you almost forget to see what she's doing, right? It was a little bit distracting. At one point, there's some giant fish, and you can see one right over her shoulder floating through the city. There's these holograms all over. It's a massive, massive cityscape, a la Blade Runner, a la The Fifth Element, Mega City from Dread. Tron was this massive network, and Tron actually took from this right down to the jacks in the back of the neck. And Tron to some extent as well, this massive city. Granted, it was within a digital world, but it was a massive city, and it was sort of a nondescript. There was a lot borrowed from Japanese culture in this, right down to the geisha robots, the people walking in the streets. This was obviously a manga from Asia, but Scarlett Johansson is herself a Caucasian actress or actor for that matter. But I'm going to tell you, there was a lot of sort of controversy around that. But I think that she was really perfect for this role. She really, really has a strong, powerful presence, and she can withstand herself as a lead actress, and she absolutely did in this. And in fact, Mamoru Oshii, who was the director of the 1995 anime, said that it was just that she was her original being was entirely assumed, basically. Like, she was this character, and I'll kind of get into the plot just here a little bit. You had Motoko Kusanagi. She had an accident. She came back with the help of this anti-terrorism task force called Section 9, and she was enhanced. Everybody in this world is somehow enhanced, whether it's their liver, whether it's their jaw, whether they have tactical enhancements like she does, or like Batu does with his eyes. They're all sort of mnemonic, robotic enhancements to the body. And she was so damaged. Her body was just so destroyed that the only thing left for her that's real is the brain. And that goes back to what we were talking about with the anti-dualism. The brain wouldn't have been able to exist without this body that was created. And it's not necessarily the artificial parts, but it is the signals that they're sending back to the brain that she needs to survive. They need each other to survive. So there you have it. But everybody is sort of tied into this global network with all this gadgetry and electronics as appendages and as organs, for that matter. But that also opens them up to hackers. That opens them up to being manipulated. That opens them up to cyber attacks within their own body, within their own biology. Pseudo quasi biology, let's call it. But that's where Kuze comes in. Kuze is one of the villains, and that name was actually borrowed from Standalone Complex as well. She eventually gets to meet him, and I did say this was a spoiler-free review, so I'm going to leave it at that. But I'm going to tell you that some of the characters, like you had Major, obviously, Batu, Beat, Takeshi Kitano, really played. He's a legendary actor. He's been around a long time. He really played this role with some serious gravitas and weight to his character. You could tell he was a powerhouse. Has been and still is. So he was exceptional. But some of the others, we had Dr. Ule, Kuze, but some of the others were kind of forgettable to me. There's so much focus on her that it just wasn't, I didn't care about them. I honestly, I know their names, obviously, but I just don't know much about them in terms of this movie, for me to care about them. So we had some other things, like there's a spider tank too. That was also from Standalone Complex. But some of these scenes, though, I keep getting back to the visual, because for me, that was the highlight here. We're taken like almost, shot for shot from the anime, the 1995 anime. There was a scene where she's running, she's fighting a character in the water. Like it's sort of like halfway to her knees, right up halfway up her shins, the deep water. The whole scene around that, right down to the guy running, and there's footsteps and the puddles and the water splashing, or the reflection of a helicopter in the puddle as they're running through this alley. That fight, the beautiful, amazing swan dive off the building, surrounded by the beautiful lights and the holograms and the architecture of this dystopian cityscape. That's right from the movie. It was just in those scenes, having known that, I'm like, wow, they really did a fantastic job with that, even busting through the glass. Here's a scene where she's walking through the water, and you can see in the background the beautiful cityscape, but you can't really tell what city it is. It's just all one nondescript city. And here's where she's busting through the glass. That is right from the movie. And that was one of the things for me. It just was so stunning visually. It was a beautiful, beautiful movie. And the action was a nicely paced movie. The action was right where it needed to be. The action was on point. It was, even if it was a little light at sometimes, it still felt, and I'm using air quotes here, you can't see me, a little bit, it was believable. Here's the swan dive. This is right, imagine Scarlett Johansson's face there. That is from the movie that we just that we just saw. There was also some really cool geisha robots, and I won't give away anything on them, but they were in the movie, and I did like them quite a bit. In fact, there's a Funko that I might get that looks just right at those. So yeah, so I did talk a lot about the philosophy, some of the existential questions that the original movie and the manga presented for you to ask yourself, for you to kind of consider what those mean to you, and what it would mean, and what does it mean to be human. And this movie, it presented some of those questions and it asked them, but it didn't dive into them as deeply as me having known the source material would have liked. It asked the questions, and then for the sake of the plot and then maybe the pacing, just quickly moved on to the next scene. So one of the faults for me was that it was beautiful, and I keep saying that. There was good action in it, really cool action, really amazing sequences there. But the movie was a little bit superficial. If you're looking for just straight up action, and I think somebody who hasn't seen or read or played any of the other Ghost in the Shell, part of the franchise, they'll be completely satisfied with that because they won't know that deeper meaning, those deeper questions are there. And then the other part was that some of the characters are somewhat forgettable for me. And I'm not going to complain about Scarlett Johansson in this role. I'll ask you, if you have concerns about it, go look at what the director of the movie said. Go look at the original manga, because she actually, as part of her shell, what she wanted was some Caucasian parts to her. And it also more fully presents the question of, are you still the same person? If she was originally Japanese or Asian character, and she's changed out her parts, for a Scarlett Johansson looking character, is she still that same? Is she still the same person or not? And you could talk about that physically, you could talk about that spiritually, you could talk about that in any number of capacities, but that question is still there, and it's presenting itself in her physicality. Is she still the same? Okay, so that was my questions. That was my take on the movie. What I thought of it. I really, really did like this movie. I gotta say, I like these type of cyberpunk, futuristic, utopian, dystopian future presenting itself as a utopian future. Sci-fi, futuristic. That's right up my alley. So I did like this movie quite a bit for that. I really did want that deeper level there, and so for my rating, I gave it an 8.5 out of 10. And that's a very, very respectful, very, very good rating in terms of the movies that I like. For that deeper flow that it had, if it did dive in a little bit more, it would have made it longer in terms of the runtime, but it would have got it probably up into the 9 range. That's what we call in the comic book world a pressing. Press it up to a higher grade. But yeah, let me know what you think down below. Let me know what your thoughts and feedback and responses were, what your reaction to this reaction were. I'll be curious to hear what that is. But this is going to do it for me. This is Jesse here with JLS Comics, and this has been a movie review for the 2017 movie Ghost in the Shell. Thanks, guys, and I will talk to you soon.